So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Becky Morris from Disability Collaborative Network.
Hi everybody, I hope everyone is keeping well. If you could just give me a second and we'll get started. Right, thank you very much indeed for that introduction, particularly in relation to what we are up to as DCN and Embed at the moment. First of all, I'll just introduce myself and then I'll introduce Sarah. So, as Sam said, I'm Becky Morris. I'm the director of the Disability Collaborative Network and I'm an associate consultant for Embed. Just so you know my background, I've actually worked in the sector for about 23 years and I've worked in a capacity as front of house, operations and collections, and now I work within access and inclusion. The key thing is with DCN is that we actually work from a range of opportunities for the heritage sector. So what we do is we work both within the heritage sector itself, but we are the partner of Embed. And that is the very key thing here, in that we work together in terms of what we can share from across sectors to enhance inclusive practice in the service provision, working practice, and also the workforce. So in accordance to that, I will hand over to Sarah. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good. Hello. Thanks for inviting me. So Sarah Simcoe, I am, as Becky mentioned, I'm partner with DCN, but myself, I'm director at DMS Wirral Limited, so I'm a diversity and inclusion consultant supporting organisations like ENEI, Purple Space, There Be Giants. So I work with quite a lot of organisations. My background and where I place myself in terms of D&I is right across that inclusion agenda, and that's right across sectors. So I also am the creator and founder of Embed, which is a consortium that leverages cross-sector expertise for us to use as lessons learned to take that across sectors in helping organisations, sectors, industries in elevating their journey around inclusion as the topic. So I get to work with lots of different organisations, get to learn lots of different lessons, and then I bring that all together under a collaborative approach for how we then allow other people to benefit from those lessons that have gone before. So absolutely delighted to be here today. I am partnering with Becky to help the heritage sector in particular as we move into reopening. So really looking forward to the conversation today. Thanks for inviting me.
Brilliant. So this is what we're going to cover today. So the first things first is how you're going to be planning to reopen your museum and the key considerations as part of that. And this is a very critical element to this at the moment, for which we've got a lot of goodness to share with you. So what we will look at as well is how you're planning to do what you can do as an organisation to understand and support the needs of your visitor. But then you've got a key asset as part of that, and it's not your collections, it's also your workforce. So how can you support your workforce in the changing environment that we find ourselves in the post-lockdown society to enable a better experience for the visitor, but also that your workforce themselves feel supported? And then what we're also going to do is look at how things in particular to what those particular needs are in this particular untested time within the heritage sector. And also, as we're such a highly competitive sector, we don't necessarily often focus on the person, particularly the frontline staff. And there's often the need for self-advocacy. So can I do my job as good as the person next to me? Because it's so competitive. So what can we do about that? And what can we learn to support our colleagues and our volunteers at this untested time? And also build confidence within your organisation through inclusive practice, particularly in your planning, your capacity and your information. So we're talking about building on capacity and resources and thinking about what would happen if we were in a second lockdown period. and being able to build upon that through the methods we're going to be describing, but also in terms of making you feel confident and empowering you in positive action to take this forward. Right. So the key considerations when you're planning for reopening: communication and different types of communication are going to be a critical tool in how you amplify and market your organisation's messages to your audiences. But it's clear from the lockdown period how many museums did not adhere to digital communication practice, particularly inclusive digital communication practice, when they were actually communicating that they were closing. So what we saw a lot of was pictures, images of text, but no link to the website, and questionable whether or not there was alternative text or as part of that image. So first things first, to ensure what your digital communications are, but also look at the key considerations to ask yourself and provide on your website, which is, does your shop window, your website and your social media channels reflect inclusive practice? What information are you sending out to your visitors, but also particularly your non-visitors as well? The visitors and non-visitors, will this information be useful and helpful to decide whether or not to visit your site? And we'll explore a bit more into that in just a bit. Is your organisation easy to find? So if you have a young child and the toilets are closed on your journey to the site, is that going to create more time in terms of travelling before you get to your site? What is your directions like? What does your building look like? Is there any kind of notable landmarks in regards to this? For people with dyspraxia, like what I've got, orientation is a critical factor in reducing anxiety. So lots of visual maps, any kind of information in respect to local landmarks, and what does your building look like? This will reduce anxiety, so then when the person enters the museum, they feel more prepared, but also in terms of your frontline staff, will be able to support that person in an easier capacity. Also, think about, are there any costs in relation to the visit? Will you be only taking contactless payment? Will cash be accepted? So in terms of contactless, people know then that they are prepared in relation to your visit. So what facilities are going to be open? What will remain closed? Are you opening your toilets? Are you going to be putting in social distancing measures? What will they look like? What are the entry points of your organisation? What are the touch points in terms of handrails, push buttons? And also, what's the situation with your cafe? Will you be able to get food and drink where you are? How will the toilets be managed? Will you offer a mobile, hireable, changing places toilet? What are the opportunities to refill the water bottles and accepting reusable cups? Particularly with this beautiful heat wave that we've had recently. What is the experience that you are sharing with the users? Do they need to bring their own headphones? Do they need to, what has been removed in terms of your interactives? This is another thing that we will explore later on. But most importantly, what's the situation if this information is put up on your website? What happens if there's something missing? Is there a direct email or a direct phone number that people can call or people can email to ensure that their queries are answered? And that is absolutely critical. Another thing as well is to ensure that you've got alternative formats in relation to the visit. So an easy read version that's available for people with learning disabilities, and also, you know, I read the easy read versions as well. Clarity of information, very quick to digest. Also a visual story, particularly for people who are autistic, to reduce that anxiety. But this is the key thing, and this is what we've been sort of looking at in the last few weeks. So this is the latest ALVA attractions recovery statistics. This is the third wave that got released last week. And the key thing is with that is that 47% of visitors will wait to see what happens before they visit a museum. And visitors are more cautious based on the offer, particularly being indoors for longer periods of time and control of toilet facilities. Other concerns reflect the behaviour of other visitors with social distancing, and some comments relate to how venues will police visitor behaviour, particularly overcrowding. So limiting capacity through advancing booking and limiting queuing, but this information needs to be managed for people who may be on the autistic spectrum, but also in terms of people with difficulties with bladder control and also the can't wait card holders. So in terms of your front of house staff, you need to consider what's going to happen if somebody comes in and they can't wait, they can't queue. What's going to be the situation with that? What's going to be the situation in regards to toilets, facilities, particularly if you're having to reduce the numbers of toilet facilities in adhering to social distancing? But also, what happens if somebody needs to have a drink or also needs to eat some food? Is there a capacity for people to bring their own and then take it away? And that's a key consideration. Another thing as well is that 38% of visitors have said we won't visit. And what does that mean? Well, it can be for a variety of reasons, but for reasons such as shielding and conditions for which people do not feel comfortable in travelling for non-essential visits. There's another element to this as well, and that is, as you know, I'm known as the toilet lady in respect to the sector, but the provision of toilets are going to be critical for so many people. And this is not just the people being shielded right now. This is actually a wider scope of individuals. So people such as have conditions such as endometriosis, they may be going through the menopause, they may be pregnant, they may have a cancer or prostate cancer that affects bladder control, they may have Crohn's or IBS. That will be part of that 38%. So the key thing here is about information and collaborating to receive that information and making sure that your front of house staff have it, and they have it in a way that's easy to find and also available on your website. So if you're the only organisation that has a open facility and you've got a shopping centre next door that has chosen not to open their facilities, you're going to get a load of people through your door, which is great, but at the same time, they're going to be using your toilets, which is fine, but that means you're going to be consistently having a high impact amount of visitors in relation to your toilets. So think about where you are in your locale and also in terms of what is going on around you in respect to reopening. That is absolutely critical. Also have conversations within your local authority in respect to facilities and also in regards to what that outlook looks like. And consider as well where you sit in those meetings. Make sure you can go to them. There's also concern about the current level of infection, and therefore people will not visit due to the responsibilities within their communities and also their families. So I don't mind putting my hand up here. I'm type 1 diabetic and I'm over 40. So I'm at moderate risk. I'm clinically vulnerable, as I've been told, and I'm being extremely careful where I'm going, and I will only go out if I have to. But the key thing is with this, though, is how we adapt as a sector is going to depend on how we reflect the visitor and user concerns and their needs. So before the lockdown, we looked very specifically of inclusive practice on how it was related to specific conditions. And this is due to often project-based practice itself, and also based on accessibility. There's a problem with that in respect to COVID. So with accessibility, it's about ensuring a person can receive the same information through the tools in comparison to a non-disabled person, such as a website, the captions, and alt text. However, with inclusion, it's ensuring that a person can visit, they can work, they can develop within an organisation based on the practice which has clear comms, services and an offer to ensure that that person is part of that consultative body and that organisation as that sector. So when I recently did some work for Universal Music, the first thing they said was, we want you because we know that we have to change and not you. That's inclusion. When it comes along as a society, we've moved across now to needs, and those needs are diverse and individual. So in terms of inclusive practice to support our colleagues and visitors, we will need to influence the service provision and working practice in this particular period. So if there was a local lockdown, digital communication and offer will support wider audiences, also in terms of homeschooling, particularly children that are traditionally homeschooled and not gone through school system. Also in terms of communication, to develop a toolkit of knowledge and experience if the organisation adopts inclusive practice. So what we're seeing is the key elements are information, flexibility, and ensuring that there is a system of change through strategy and planning throughout other sectors. Would you agree with that, Sarah, that we're seeing flexibility, also conversation and collaboration in respect to producing inclusive practice in other sectors?
Absolutely. So one of the core things we see is listening to the voice. We call it the lived experience, right? So listening to the voice of lived experience. So whether that's how it feels to be a member of staff in a museum, or how it feels to be a visitor, or how it feels to be a contractor supplying, listening to that voice in a collaborative way that allows us to then affect change across policies and practices and services and the offerings and the collections, having that direct link is what's ultimately behind that. But as you mentioned, core to that is when you're going through with that collaboration, how is that interpreted then into what that feels like in practice in terms of the visitor experience? What does that feel like as the employee experience? And ensuring that there's a transparency in the information that you're also sharing and offering. So people, where they've had direct experience, they're then contributing, you're making change, they understand the decision making that's happened behind it. That transparency right now is really, really important, particularly as we're trying to attract visitors either to the digital world of your museums or your galleries, your exhibition centres, and also physically back into those wonderful open spaces. That transparency information is also going to be really important.
That's brilliant. Yeah, thank you for that. That is absolutely key. And the best bit of all is that because we've got this wonderful partnership with Embed, we are here to help you in that transition and then that opportunities that will bring, particularly now in respect to the challenging budgetary constraints that we have and also the future of the sector. So the key thing is with this as well, it's about enabling that those people that are being shielded can actually engage in digital offers and online offers, that they're not forgotten about. That is absolutely critical. The key thing is as well is that that group of people is bigger than you think it is. Just throwing my cards on the table there. So inclusive digital comms and also inclusive digital online offers are going to be critical to your overall offer, and also in terms of supporting your visitors as they come and visit. It also keeps your profile up as well in respect to your community and also the wider sector, and also attract non-users. But what we've also got to consider is intersectional inclusion, because we talk a lot about accessibility and we also talk a lot about inclusion. But what is intersectional inclusion? So the key thing is with all of this is that there are 9 protective characteristics, as you can see from the slide. However, recently in the BMJ, you'll see how intersectionality doesn't, this is a key thing, and I'm going to share the link to this because it's a fantastic article. So for example, in the British Medical Journal, there has been an article recently about how intersectionality and COVID are extremely key in understanding the impact and risk to audiences and people. So intersectionality doesn't look at holistic experiences, nor the hierarchy of groups. So it's not about, this is for one particular group of people, this is what it's going to be like for them. No. Also in terms of hierarchy. But instead, the intersectionality within COVID-19 society is a key in understanding how people are and can become disadvantaged, and how there is further risk and impact to particular factors such as age, disability, economic status, health, underlying health conditions, migration, and also race and ethnicity. And this can be through, but not limited to, economic status, location of where you are in the country, and also societal structures of power, particularly within key factors such as occupation, housing, earning ability, and access to education, which increase risk to COVID. And that's the key thing, is that when you're presenting your information, you need to think about people that may have difficulty reading, as an example. So one of the things that I've done in the last 10 years is support adults with difficulties with informal education, which has meant that they've had difficulties in engaging with written text. So when it comes to visiting a museum, they may not be able to engage with that written text. So think about your visual imagery in relation to this. Think about text to speech in regards to a potential offer, because that in itself will attract these fabulous people to your organisation, but also in terms of keeping them safe as well. We also need to consider that as we go through life, our needs change, whether it be temporal or developmental. So, and 80% of disabilities are indeed hidden. Therefore, your plans need to operate that the person may not share with you what they need. But what you can do is provide in your information what you have, and then that follow-up of what a person can do to ask, and that it doesn't have to be at the head of the queue. It can be something for which you could have something like a toilet map of where all your facilities are and the different types. So I was speaking to somebody recently where they had all got twistable taps. Now for some people, twistable taps are absolutely okay, particularly if they have a condition such as dementia because of that recall. So put that in your toilet map, things like that. Right. There's also the legislation that you need to consider as well. And so you need to consider things such as all museums that are central and local government funded should reach WCAG 2.1 AA as part of the public sector body's website and mobile applications number 2, Accessibility Regulations 2018. You've also got the Equality Act, which is the duty of reasonable adjustments to not place disabled people at a substantial disadvantage in comparison to non-disabled people. And the Equality Act Section 29, which is your service provision including marketing and websites. If you provide online ticketing, shopping, direct marketing, or advertising via a website, then the organisation needs to check if it's an information society service provider. This in turn, in terms of reasonable adjustments for disabled and neurodivergent people to use your website and provide services in advertising that does not discriminate against other people, like that. Right. So in terms of intersectional inclusive practice, we know that from the NHS that the risk of the virus is not evenly distributed. So like we're saying, it's based on individual needs, not on specific groups. We also know that some visitors have been shielding, and also that some visitors will be at higher risk to COVID, including people with diabetes, and also lung conditions and high blood pressure. This is including and not limited to, but also that there will be people who have challenging social and economic backgrounds, people who are Black ethnic minority groups, and also disabled people who will also be affected. Right. So, in relation to this and in relation to your information for your front of house staff and your workforce and your overall offer, first thing you need to think about is how accessible and effective are your website and content. This is really important because if a visitor struggles to engage with any news or updates, including when you're closed or when you're open, that information needs to be available so they can, your profile is raised, it continues to be up there, but also the visitor knows where they stand in regards to the information that they're receiving and also the decision of whether or not to visit your site. Another thing as well is, will a visitor be able to make online purchases or donations online to support you in regards to your money? Also in regards, gone wrong. Also in regards to this as well, will they be able to engage with you about donating objects and also in respect to inquiries and bequests? If you have a situation with volunteering experiences or any jobs, if you're inclusive in your offer on your website, you're going to have more of a support and also representation of your society and your communities if you've got an inclusive website. The other key thing as well, though, is that when it comes down to it, there will be people who are isolated and feel lonely. So we know that 13.9 million disabled people live in the UK, but 53% of disabled people feel lonely. 77% of young disabled people feel lonely. And 18% of learning disabled people feel alone. And that's from Joe Cox's Commission on Loneliness. So therefore, outreach is absolutely critical at this time in relation to visitors and non-visitors, but particularly people who are being shielded or do not want to leave their homes or may not be able to. So we've just got that there. The key thing is as well in regards to the common barriers of digital inclusion is that it becomes a situation where it's just not seen as integral in regards to organisation and strategy and planning. There seems to show a lack of management and leadership buy-in. These are all the sort of subconscious messages that come out in respect to the organisation. So if that is happening, why would you want to visit it? So particularly in terms of capacity in time and planning, this is more about who you've got in terms of your workforce and also in terms of the skills that you have to enable that you've got the strategy and the planning to develop in relation to your overall offer. So for example, your digital comms, do you have anybody in your front of house team that is very good at social media? Do you have the strategy and the capacity in social media management tools to support you? And what skills do you have in your team? And it is for people at all levels in regards to this. and also, most importantly, reach that AA standard. Another key thing as well is that, and what we know from other sectors is that this affects all businesses, and museums are the core of all activity and representation for people to engage in all of the services. We also know that digital inclusion and communication can regain customer confidence by using technology to connect and develop relationships with museum visitors and customers. The museum and the organisation can become proactive in understanding the needs of the audience and how these change. So within this, the first thing I say to everybody in terms of their reopening plans is, what have you got? From your digital through to your physical offer. And how does that sit in terms of your profile, your communications with your visitors, and also in terms of engagement with your non-visitors as well? And is there a link back to the website in regards to donations, also in regards of monetary input, and also in terms of your online ticketing, like that? Right. So in terms of information on that visitor's journey, we've got to also look at managing expectations and behaviours. And this is the key thing in respect to this, is that this can be written, this can be flexible in terms of social distancing. So if you need to queue, is there a time ticket factor? If there is a time ticket factor, how do you book? Also in terms of usability and also clarity in what you want the visitor to do and how are you going to communicate that information. Also, that there needs to be the transparency and consideration of the risk and safety of visitors and staff. This is absolutely critical, particularly in regards to what those key behaviours are, but also in terms of what to do if they adhere to them, and also what happens if they don't. But also in terms of where you sit in regards to visitor safety as well. There's also that element as well where it's about the developmental of a range of support both before and after and during, during and after a visit, via links to the web and that digital offer to keep that profile there in your stabilisation and recovery, and how you can attract existing and new visitors as well. So one of the key elements to this as well is ensure that all of your digital output has live and closed captions in terms of your information. So if you produce a video of the reopening of your site, it needs to have live or closed captions. There also needs to be audio description. Will there be opportunities to have Zoom or any kind of online lectures? Will there be text to speech? Will there be tablet and mobile enabled information? What is the situation with your bandwidth so people can go online, particularly if they're near your house or your property or your museum? What is the situation with different languages? Is there Makaton? Is there easy read versions? And then your online events linking back to your services. And then there's travel. So literally, they've decided they're going to come and see you. Got a problem though, in that how will visitors travel to your museum? And this is why I said at the beginning, how easy is it to find you? What's the situation with your car parks? Is there any car parks nearby? What's the payment machines like? Do you need to use cash? Can you use contactless? What's the situation in respect to buses and public transport, particularly with your staff who may need to come in during high volume traffic periods such as rush hour? Do they have to? What's the situation in enabling somebody to come in at a staggered time? Consider that situation in terms of anxiety and also in terms of risk and safety. So for example, at the moment within public transport, it's actually very difficult for people. One of the rules is that you don't have to wear a mask if you're disabled, but if you're seen to get on a bus and you're not wearing a mask, you may be kicked off. So consider that in respect to your reopening. Are you going to be reliant on a car? So again, the social and economic situation is also narrowing that audience, because cars are expensive to run. And the key thing is with that is that something for which your digital offer could actually be more supportive at this time. And then they're here with a rather cool carpet. It would appear from that slide. Right. Just another thing that I was thinking of now is where are your taxi dropping off points? Because some people will prefer to use a taxi in respect to all of this. So think about your picking up and dropping off points for taxis, and also in respect to accessible taxis as well, and put them on your website. So they've got here. The key thing is that with key information on the cafe, the toilets, the signage, including directional and also frequency. So if you've got a problem with your signage, do something about it, even if it's temporal. You need to think about your visual imagery. You also need to think about your information in terms of its format and font. If you're using an app of any kind, can people download it from their own phones? And do they need to bring in their own headphones in relation to this? The visitors need to bring in a full bottle of water, particularly if it's during this beautiful weather. If they do need to bring in a bottle of water, tell them like that. With your toilets and your sinks, what types of taps do you have? What's the contrast on your grab rails and walls? What's the width of your corridors? What's the frequency of facilities within the building? How many do you have? Will you have any more toilets made available? Will you have a Mobiloo toilet in your facility, in your organisation? So consider this and ensure that that information is there for your front of house team, and also in terms of your website as well. Now, some of you have spoken about whether or not to have interactives, and this is absolutely critical. If there's something, literally, look at this. The key thing is with COVID is that we know from our work and our collaborative partnership with the University of East Anglia that COVID can live on hard surfaces for up to 3 days. And you need to consider how often the frequency of the cleaning will be and a risk assessment to ensure and minimize risk. So your cleaning, your interactive, frequency of the cleaning, and also can you afford that situation in terms of regular cleaning and also your staff. Another thing as well is that if you have dressing up costume, it needs to have a, let me just get that because it's covered up, I want to get it right. It shouldn't be reused in a 72-hour window. And ideally what you should have is separate rooms to the items that are housed in used, and also safe costumes like that. So again, this is not about saying we can't do this because X has happened. We can't do this because it lives on hard surfaces for 3 days. This is about minimizing risk and saying to yourself, are we going to have somebody that's available to clean? Or is it better to focus on the embossed signage so people who are partially sighted or blind can come in, touch the signage and they're on their way and they can get around the museum? Is it better to say, actually, we're not going to do it like this in terms of the touch stuff, but what we will look at is how we can explore our current digital offer in respect to headphones and mobiles to ensure that people get a more inclusive experience. So actually innovate, work the problem, think about how it can help the situation, provide some leverage, get the team in, discuss what you're going to do. Don't shut it down without that transparency. This is why we've shut it down, because of X, Y, and Z. Think about the situation in respect to ensuring that audiences can still engage. Sarah, have you got anything to add to this so far? Add to that so far?
That was beautiful. Really well. I would say, if in doubt, ask is actually the big piece of advice I would give. There are lots of great organisations and forums and groups and networks and whatever you want to call them offering supportive guidance right now. And as part of your planning, my ask would be, my encouragement would be, when you're thinking COVID, you're thinking access, because access will be impacted by what you do when it comes to your COVID planning. So somebody had asked me for an example recently, and I mentioned this because it links to the topic of transmission. And somebody had said, oh, you know what, it's great. We're really accessible. The routes around our museum are great. They're going to accommodate wheelchair users. But then when you started looking at them needing to plan the safety aspects of COVID and allow for some of that social distancing, you then impact the ability for a wheelchair user to potentially use that space. So you have this knock-on effect, which then can knock on to the effect of transmission. Because if there isn't ample space for all of your visitors to come in, you've got that increased risk of touching surfaces and touch points around them. So my encouragement would be, when you're doing your planning, you naturally link accessibility and COVID together, because I think that's going to put you in better stead than trying to look at the two things in isolation. So definitely bring those two things together would be my big thing here. And I think the other thing that I would also say is be really kind to yourselves. I find myself saying this a lot to organisations out there right now. We are in uncharted territory and we're trying to reopen, and you know, it's a very anxiety driven time right now to get it right. So I would say be kind to yourselves and do leverage the support that's out there when it comes to understanding transmission, accessibility and COVID in a little bit more detail.
That is exactly it. Thanks, Sarah, because the key thing is at the moment, it's very easy to feel overwhelmed by this, when actually it's about sometimes taking a step back and saying to yourself, what can I do? What do we know? What's our situation within our communities? What are those key barriers in relation to people getting out and about? What can I do to navigate that? What information do I have? Who do I need to talk to? And it's about building that way instead of saying we've considered everything, because you're putting too much pressure on yourselves if you do that.
Yeah, and if I could add, Becky, the reason why we've structured this conversation as we have is when you're considering your visitor experience, consider it as the journey. So that it's the reason why there's that sequence in the conversation. It's considering from the point they look at what you've got to offer on your website to then traveling to landing in that lovely carpet-filled reception area to how they're going to experience the opening. Consider your visitor journey. When we get to the workforce a little later, you're also going to see a similar approach.
Yeah, that is absolutely key. So in regards to this as well, we have got the toilets, as that is a key factor in this. The toilets themselves, in terms of we know that there is a route of infection in respect to toilet use, and that is key, that people close the lid before they flush and have appropriate inclusive signage to show that. Also, that it's regularly cleaned as well. So ideally on the hour, if you can. Consider your touch points throughout the museum, so handrails. How do you open doors? There are key rings that you can get at the moment in terms of opening and closing, but can you actually open the door with your elbow? Things like that. And also consider your aircon. Look into that, and also contact somebody in respect to the current guidance in respect to COVID and air conditioning units. So this is another thing that we've looked into as well. So for example, wearing face masks in the museum, the face mask guidance has changed. Also look at the buddy system for people who are partially sighted or blind, particularly if they use a guide dog. Also ensure that if you do use any plexiglass within your reception area, don't have it with a window at the back or really high, strong lighting, because that can cause glare. And that means if people can lip read, they won't be able to because of that glare. Also look at your signage in respect to frequency and clarity, particularly if it's in regards to any conditions, which there may be issues in regards to bladder control, but also in regards to people when it's their time of the month. Consider your signage to be embossed, braille and visual imagery as well. Also look at cleaning and hand washing through appropriate signage and support, particularly for kids and also in respect to adults as well. We've also got now the workforce. The key thing is with this is that with any creative strategy and planning within the workforce, this can be used in emergency planning, particularly COVID and evacuation procedures. So this is the key thing in regards to this, is look at your flexibility within the working practice. You need to think about the risk of your staff. Your staff are as important as the visitor. The key thing is with that as well is that in terms of understanding risk, this is where the managers need to consider where we are in respect to communications and also in regards to emergencies and policy and procedures in respect to staff as well. We need to have clear structures to share concerns and anxieties about returning, particularly if they're frontline. And this will include people who live on their own. If they do become ill, is there a way that someone can drop off food or medication if they become ill or need to self-isolate? Are there clear communications on actions being taken? Is there a transparency in terms of decision making, particularly in respect to how we stand as a group of people? Make sure that that communication is there. But also think about the alternative format. So for example, if you're going to have a large amount of information and you're under pressure, have it as a flow chart instead of having it as a big tome of information. Think about things in terms of being able to find things easily, making sure that there are clear labeled information, but also where to find the stuff as well. So you're not running after people, trying to do things, several different things at once. You can tell I used to work front of house. But the key thing in all of this as well is that where does it sit in respect to your leadership and your employees? You've got to have a situation and a structure where it's the employees being able to report back to management, and management can report back to leadership, and then leadership to management and management to employees. It's something that, to be honest, in the 23 years in museums, I don't see enough of. And the key thing is with that is that we have got to do something about that, because we need to have a situation where our staff feel confident in this situation, but also that that confidence itself will change at some point, and they may become increasingly anxious, and they need to be able to share that anxiousness and also where things sit in respect to where they are in a very competitive sector, so they don't swallow it up and take it home. They can actually do something about it like that. So one of the key elements of this is that with colleagues, there will be some frontline staff who may feel that they cannot do their job right now because of an underlying health condition, and also where we are in respect to the current R rating. So is there flexibility in working practice? is there an opportunity to be able to share some information or some work that they can do from home? Is there a situation with their travel where they need to get in at a particular time, but that involves the underground, it involves getting on a bus? Is there a system in place that you can work with that person to ensure that they feel able to do their work, but at the same time that in itself may have changed? Also, what are the lessons that we've learned during the lockdown? Well, first of all, we can all work from home. And the second thing as well is that we have got various tools that we've amassed during this period in terms of Zoom and also in terms of Microsoft Teams, digital work that we could actually bring through into the post-lockdown period. We've also got clear structures to share concerns and anxieties about returning. And this can be team meetings, one-to-ones, it can be a system that is agreed and worked with the front of house team. Also, in terms of your transparency of your decision making, particularly in regards to safety, you also need to think about your colleagues and their specific needs. So they may be a carer, they may be a single parent, they may have an underlying health condition. You need to be able to negotiate and support those colleagues in that post-lockdown world. In terms of policy, it's key that there needs to be recognition that there are changing needs within the staff, and also that those needs may radically change at some point. And we need to build on the knowledge of the user experience through procedures and policies that reflect intersectional inclusive practice that we were talking about earlier. So particularly your frontline staff will be absolutely key in reflection of this. They're your people who are on the shop floor, so to speak. What are the users doing? What are they thinking? What's the feedback been so far? And create that communication model to go right up to the leadership to ensure that those practices are adapted as and when they need to. And also there is a point of reflection of where you are so far within the organisational health. And another key element to this as well is think about your leadership and engagement with colleagues through a variety of methods. So do you have the space and the opportunity to set up a staff network? Do you have a staff forum? What is your situation in respect to developing connections through things like Museum Hour? Also in terms of forums like GEM, are there a way of further communication, but also in terms of connections within the sector? But also that in itself needs to be a reflective experience. So broaden it in terms of those contacts. Also in terms of what that practice is, have a chat with us. Consider also the importance of enabling people to share their knowledge and also feel safe in that environment in sharing that knowledge as well. So a key error into this, because I first saw this about 3 years ago and thought this is ideal for the heritage sector. And it's something that we are introducing within the sector itself. So what this is the workforce passport. Sarah, would you like to pick this up, or would you like me to introduce it?
Sorry, I lost all sound for a second.
Don't worry.
I'm happy to talk about the passport.
Beautiful.
It's something that I have used myself over the years. So the passport originally created as a passport that focused in on disabled people and the adjustments that those people may need, originally created by BT a number of years ago. It's kind of changed shape over the years, and where we find ourselves now is the value that people can take from it when it becomes a workplace passport in particular. So for any particular need across those multiple identities that we all have, for any particular need, the passport is a really great tool by offering a useful structure for members of staff to share their needs with their managers, their superiors, their customers, whoever the case may be, in a way that removes some of the difficulty and the uncomfortableness of the conversation. So the passport is essentially a tool to enable any member of staff to effectively feel supported, to ensure that they feel the reassurance that there's plans in place to support them in the workplace. And particularly where we find ourselves now, as we're reopening and we need to be more mindful of the needs of our people, having a simple tool such as a workplace passport is really going to help with some of those conversations, and keeping a record of it that can support that person and identify any adjustments that they're going to need for a short or a long-term period. So I've used one of these. My former employed career, I had a passport that had my conditions listed in it, and it enabled me to have a conversation with my manager around what I needed in terms of support in the workplace. But then it also meant I didn't have to have that same conversation when I changed managers. So I didn't have to go through any level of anxiety and feeling uncomfortable. I found it to be a really simple but really effective tool that supported me in the workplace. So certainly something that's easy to implement. We've got one that we've written as embed that's a free of charge tool. It's really easy to implement, but so effective in that conversation.
For my own work in respect to not only DCN but also neurodiversity, they are a system that is recommended within the Westminster Achievability Commission report on neurodiverse voices of what is a good workplace, and also in terms of good practice. So what I find about these is that they're for staff at all levels, but also in terms of they support your employer as well as your employee as well. So if you're lacking in confidence in what to do, a passport can help you in creating that conversation, and also in terms of that support as well. So you become more about planning and strategy. And also if you're looking at your emergency planning and say somebody's needs have changed, say they've broken their leg, they've just had an operation. So if you have an emergency within your organisation and you've got to get objects out, the passport scheme is going to be ideal in ensuring that your team are able to resolve the situation itself in getting the objects out. But the most important thing is that you are able to plan for the people who are, on this occasion, may not be able to do that. So it creates flexibility. We've got about 25 minutes left. So what I was thinking of is, let's do a bit of action planning, because I imagine your heads, you're all thinking, I need a cup of tea. I need to think about this. You know, oh my God, you know, it's absolutely fine to feel that way. But at the same time, there are plenty of things that we can do. So let's have a discussion. Let's see what we can do to support you in your action planning. And I've got some key questions up in relation to this. So in terms of this, so I can only see half my screen. So here we are. So what skills, facilities and information, what do you have? What do you need? And what structures do you have for your workforce? So do we have any questions in the chat? Do we have any queries or any kind of...
There's no outstanding questions in the chat, but there's been some really great sharing actually. So we were talking about what a great idea the toilet map is going to be. Again,
cool.
Really simple but effective tool for people to implement.
That's the key.
Having that information to share. The other thing that was mentioned to support you all in your action planning is Alison shared that there's some great examples of European museums and the guidance that they've put in place around reopening that we can also leverage and learn from those lessons. I think that's a great idea. One of the things that we really want to encourage you to do is learn from others, right? So one of the things that we're currently creating at the moment is an action-based set of guidance. So there's lots of guidance out there, some of it fairly top level. We're hopefully, fingers crossed this week, going to be offering some suggested actions and recommendations. Including this type of information in there as part of your reopening is a really great point. And then there was also a lovely offer from Eleanor. So someone has made some really simple, accessible signage for kids around hand washing and social distancing. Eleanor's kindly going to share that across. And I think also having those tried and tested pieces of signage, if that's working really well, is also a really great place to start when we're trying to figure out what to include within the plan. So some really great sharings coming through. The other one that I've had, so I've just had a question from Stephen. Any thoughts on how to manage the need to collect visitors' details for track and trace requirements? Some museums may be moving to require pre-booking to collect this data. How do we ensure that this is accessible?
Oh, that's a good one.
Good question.
Yeah, I like it. The key thing is that if you have your standard, so I'm going to go on different scenarios. So say it's a ring binder with boxes for name, address, email address. Not only do you have a situation there in respect to GDPR, because people's names and addresses are in full view, but also you've got a situation if somebody's got Parkinson's, or they may have carpal tunnel syndrome in respect to their hands, they may have arthritis. That in itself may be difficult for them to do. So what I would do is actually look at this scenario in terms of how that data would be collected. So if you're going to have an offer where you say to people, I think National Army Museum have said this in respect to what they're going to do. So they're offering timed slots for people to visit, and these are free visits. To add to that, consider how you could have people's details entered digitally in that process. And what you can do is use, see if I've got one. Yeah. Something like this. So they're not having to use fingers, and make sure that it's regularly cleaned. So I would unpick it. I would necessarily go towards a digital, maybe have something like that front of house can do. So can I take your name and details? There we are, done like that. That would be what I would suggest. What do you think, Sarah? Something for front of house to pick up, I feel, in respect to.
Yeah, and so I suppose there's two things that come to mind. So if we're collecting data at the door, it's ensuring that you're compliant with any GDPR requirements, data security and the information that we hold. So being clear on why you're taking any information, if you're doing it front of house, and what that's going to be used for. If you're going to be doing that digitally, then Stephen, the same rule applies as any other digital content. So for it to be deemed as good practice in its accessibility, then using guidance through the likes of WCAG would still be relevant, because it's going to give you the options around how to structure the content, how to ensure the format and the contrast is appropriate, the layout, the typeface, all of that great information. The WCAG will still offer really useful guidance for those accessible routes into collecting that data. What we are doing, what the team are doing, what Juliet's doing is capturing all of these chats that are coming through. So anything that I think we can share some additional information offline just to support that process, we'll do that offline. But that would be my feeling. Just make sure from a data protection perspective, you're being clear on why you're collecting data at front of house, what it's going to be used for, and then if it's digital, to ensure that you're using some of those good practice guidance, such as WCAG that's already out there.
Yeah.
And there's another question that's just come in from Sam. Do you recommend different time slots where visitors with additional needs may feel less vulnerable? For example, less numbers of visitors, more staff to support that visit, etc.
Do you know what? I'm in two minds about it. I am, because for me, what we need is basically
you can hear the cogs.
You can hear the cogs, can't you? Yeah. So if you have a group of people and say from 11 till 12:30, we're going to have this for the museum open specifically for people with X, Y, and Z. Well, first of all, that's fine. But how permanent is that going to be? And for me, I always feel quite uncomfortable about particular times for particular groups of people.
Yeah.
Because you're still going to have a situation with the building being indoors, the touch surfaces. You're also going to have people who are particularly at risk. I would look at it from a layered approach. I've always gone for a layered approach. So your online events, your situation in terms of risk and safety, and also in regards to your overall offer. And think to yourself, are we going to be inundated with people? And if we are, how are we going to manage that? Because the key thing is as well, there was some talk about we're only going to allow people with ambulant mobility and wheelchair users in lifts. Well, people with ambulant mobility may not use a stick or crutches. So how are you going to manage that? So I would look at it more about building in information about your overall offer, and also change your overall offer. So then the people that say, actually, I don't want to know this, I don't want to do it, can you still relate to and be part of those people's lives? So you can be online, you can do talks, you can do live captioning, make it the big event. Be innovative in your thinking. Innovating doesn't need to be cost. And then consider the visit in respect to people, crowd control, behaviour, and also in terms of safety and risk. I don't know about you, Sarah, but I do. I always feel maybe I'm, I just get nervous that it becomes the new permanency, that this is for particular people, particular time.
I agree with you. I think right now is the opportunity for us to ensure that inclusion is embedded in everything we do forever, full stop. Yeah. It's that place, isn't it? And I understand where Sam's coming from, because how do you ensure you're covering the needs of all the people that are going to come through the door? I think with that is the assumption that everyone's going to tell us that they've got needs before they come through the door. So if we go back to the intersectionality of our identities, you're going to have people with multiple identities and multiple needs, but that may not actually view themselves as somebody who's vulnerable, or maybe uncomfortable with feeling that they need to have a specific buddied, assisted time slot. So I'd probably lean more into plans that allow you to accommodate everyone and their needs in a safe way. So any reopening, any limited number of visitors coming in, I think is wise right now. And having the staff suitably supported to be able to ensure a great, safe experience for those reduced number of visitors coming in, I think that's great to do. But I would ensure that the inclusion aspect is for anyone that comes through the door. I think you potentially tie yourselves up in knots if you have ring-fenced time slots. It's a crude comparison, apologies, but if you think of all the online shopping right now, because we've tried to go to a time-slotted approach, you've ended up with this huge issue with people not necessarily getting what they need. So whilst it's a crude comparison, I think as we reopen and people come into physical spaces, I think the slotted approach just has to be mindful of everyone that's going to walk through the door rather than specific groups of people. So, but yeah, I understand why people get nervous about it. You're welcome, Sam. So I've just seen another one from, I hope I pronounce Aylin. I'm so sorry if I've pronounced that wrong. Has just made a really important comment, and that is that it's so important that embossed and braille signage is part of your regular cleaning procedures. Absolutely. So when we're talking touch points, we're talking signs, if it's got braille or emboss on it, we're talking handrails, we're talking lift buttons, we're talking phones, and the pump on the hand sanitizer. Who's sanitising the hand sanitizer? Just a question. Anywhere where somebody human is going to touch then that's what we're talking about. But signage, absolutely, really great point.
Totally, yeah.
And then Olivia, sorry, Becky, you were going to add?
No, I was just thinking in terms of, and ensure that when it comes to your toilet cleaning scheme, that the signage gets done as well. So don't miss out on the signage on the doors, particularly in toilets.
Yeah, good point. Another question from Olivia. We'd like to have a one-way system at our museum, but the way that the building is set up makes this possible for non-disabled visitors, but not some disabled visitors. We have a set of stairs on each side of the building, but only one lift. Do you have any suggestions for working around that? Currently thinking of having one way as a recommended route, but there is a worry about whether it may cause tension or difficulties for disabled visitors.
That's an interesting one. So, right, glasses have come off now, really am thinking. Right, so when it comes down to it, if you've got 2 flights of stairs, the first things first is to ensure that you've got that information to hand. So make sure that people are aware, put my glasses back on now. So make sure people are aware of those stairs, right? Also explain that you've got the one lift, right? The second thing you need to consider as well is, how's your signage? Because one key thing that I would say is that people use lifts if the signage isn't very good as well. So what I'm thinking of is that reduce the use of the lift for people with wheelchairs, ambulant mobility, things like that, right? But at the same time, look at the potential impacts for why people need to use the lift in the first place. So there was a situation once in a museum that I visited where the signage, the directional signage to the galleries, to the facilities, to the cafe, to the restaurant, was pretty infrequent, and the lift was tiny. So people were using the lift as a navigation tool to be able to explore the building because they couldn't understand where they were. So think about your floor plans, think about your signage, and also explain to people in respect to your information. We've got 2 stairs. How many stairs do you have? Are there handrails at either side? So if you've got ambulant mobility, if you've got a situation in respect to stairs like me, are you able to use the stairs instead of the lift? Like that. And then what I would do is think about your signage in respect to the wheelchair user, to the person who's the wheelchair user, and also in terms of what you would like people to do and trial it. What do you reckon, Sarah? I think.
Yeah, so I don't know which museum we're talking about. Feel free to send your floor plan, and we can
have a look at it.
A more informed view. So for those who don't know, we also do access auditing. So
yes,
this
is why we're talking the way we are, by the way, because we spend a lot of times in buildings with various tape measures and force gauges and things. Yeah,
Olivia, I would say if creating a one-way system is going to offer better safeguarding, I would say explore it. And to Becky's point in that safeguarding, just need to consider the one-way route to the lift. And that's going to be the one-way route into the lift and the one-way route out of the lift. And then when you are heading towards the lift, whether you're somebody with wheelchair use or ambulant mobility or service dog perhaps, or whether you're somebody with another visitor with any conditions or impairments, also consider them as a group. So your safeguarding when it comes to COVID and your social distancing and all that, you're going to have to consider that as a group. But by all means, please do share the plan of the building, and then we can make more of an informed view. But I would say if it's safeguards, do it. You just need to consider it in, and then you need to consider it back out.
Yeah. And
then what that space around the lift is going to feel like.
And consider those impactful key elements as well. Sorted.
So we've had another one. Policy on numbers using lift at one time as it is an enclosed space. Okay, so what is our view on the number of people that can use a lift at one time?
it depends on how big the lift is.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And also how many people are part of the same group as well. So not as in a group of friends, but as in terms of the same household. So it really depends on how big your lift is. And consider that in terms as well, look at your lift, give it a measure, but also in terms of ensuring that you've got some clear, high contrast floor signage on the bottom, in terms of, so you know, and people know when it's reached capacity for that time. There is also some arguments about just allowing one person in a lift with their carer or parent if necessary.
Yeah, and if it allows, not everyone's going to be able to do this. Some of us don't have many members of staff on site. If it's allowed, and if there's the opportunity to have somebody around and about that area that can offer support in terms of numbers going in, it's one of the things actually that we've included in the action-based guidance that we're going to make available to everyone. And we're offering the size of the lifts, and based on the size of the lift, the number of people, and we're also offering some thoughts on how you can manage the space in and around it. But certainly within your opening plans, it's going to be dependent on the size of your lift. Totally. We'll make sure we share the link with Juliet and Sam to forward on to people once that guidance is available.
Yeah.
Any other questions from anyone? Any other lessons learned as you're planning your reopening you'd like to share with anyone? Always like reusing a bit of good practice.
Yeah. And also, you know, it's okay to share. It's all right. We're not going to stand back and go, you didn't do that, did you? We're not like that. We're a constructive, critical friend. We're here to help you and support you. And if you call us up and go, where do I start? That's fine. It's fine. We can do something about it, and we will work with you and alongside you in respect to your offer.
I'll leave you for a moment to think of any other questions you've got. The one thing that I would offer before we hand back to Sam and Juliet is, when you're doing your planning, if you've already created your plan, great. Maybe go back to it and just look at this. If you're about to create it, then maybe this will help. So the way in which you could create your plan to ensure you're covering all of the bases, there are almost 4 streams of activity across 2 core components. So your 2 core components, your visitor experience, your workforce experience. Within those 2 things, you're going to have a view of your built environment for the physical space of the museum or the gallery or the exhibition centre, whatever your organisation is. So you've got the built environment. You've also then got your digital environment. So whether that's your website, your interactives, your digital content, and any information that you're digitally sharing, newsletters, whatever the case may be, you're going to have your digital stream, information on safety around COVID when you're reopening. You're then going to have a third one, which is based on your service, the offerings and the service that you're making available out into the world. And then you've got your specific workforce actions. All of them will have interdependencies. When you're building your plan, if you think of those 2 core components, visitor, workforce, and then your built environment, your physical, your service, and how the workforce then underpins all, I think that allows you to start focusing in on some of the key areas of consideration as part of your planning.
That's the key.
No other questions are coming through right now.
Okie doke.
So
right.
Sam. Sam, we pass back to Sam, I think.
Over to you.
Hi, I can't see myself, but I don't suppose that matters. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Well, marvellous, thank you. So that's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Becky and Sarah. I think you'll all agree that's been a really well-rounded discussion, covering so much. There's so much for us to think about. And yes, I totally agree. I talk about sending museums quite a lot, and it's always about the journey, isn't it? Starting with the critical information gathering and sharing at your websites, so that people can, even on a normal day-to-day services, see whether or not visiting your site is going to be suitable and enjoyable and accessible for them. So that's fantastic to share the information. Thank you so much. There's lots of questions I'm sure people will be bubbling away with, and perhaps they can, if you're happy for people to contact you directly, both Becky and Sarah, with any questions that you've got coming on from that.
Absolutely.
to clarify, we will we'll share your guidance when it's up and running on our South East Museums Development Programme website, and also share the slides from today, because they may be updated from the discussions we've had. We'll share the film we've been recording of this training session. So that will all go on. Keep an eye out for that in the next week or so. And as I said as well, for those of you who are in our region in the South East, do contact your Museum Development Officer to see about any more support and advice that we can give you. I mean, I'd say that anyway, wherever you are listening in the country now, you'll have a museum development team, and they're there to support you through this particularly trying time, as is always. And we're quite fortunate that we're linked into the advice and support as it's coming literally off the press. In the South East, we will be having some recovery grants coming up soon, so check out in early July. Do keep checking our website for that. And that will help support museums to put in place some of the things that we've been talking about today as they reopen, to be as inclusive and accessible as possible to everybody. I think just to leave, really, I suppose it's obviously this is likely to be an evolving space, isn't it? So as more museums reopen, and we're going to be starting to do so from about, I think the 8th is about the earliest I've heard of someone doing it, and we're going to learn more from their so it's really important to just remember to be flexible, adaptable, and keep that confidence going forward, because our visitors will definitely be looking to us for that confidence to keep what we're doing and doing well. And hopefully on this we'll build new visitors. I think that's quite likely and possible. And I totally agree with I'm sorry about my difficult question that I put in there, but I put it in deliberately because the work that I'm involved with often comes up with talking about things like inclusive hours or relaxed hours, or particularly to do with children with SEND. So I just thought this is a question that I'm sure is going to come up. People will be thinking about it. So quite happy to ask the awkward question. But that's you're absolutely right. Inclusivity is every day, all day, and this is a really good opportunity for museums to take that conversation forward in a practical, healthy way. So that's fantastic. Thanks so much, both of you, Becky and Sarah, for sharing your time with us today and your expertise. I know, and thank you everybody for attending. I can't actually see you now because of my screenshot showing me something else, but I'm sure you're all there. Do get in contact and your MDOs in whatever area that you are. Juliet, are you still there? Do you have anything else to add?
I am. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I'll just add, there is another session that we're hosting with Becky and Sarah coming up in a couple of weeks. That covers digital access and inclusion for business, producing content specifically, looking at tools around that. So if you haven't signed up for that, please do. You'll find the information on our website, South East Museum Development. And thank you everyone for joining us today.